Welcome to the first in a series of talk videos where I focus on Bannerlord. Yes, I focus on Mount & Blade Bannerlord, which is coming out in March 2020 to Steam Early Access. In this first video, we're going to be talking about the factions and my thoughts on each faction. Alright, so first off, we're going to be talking about Botania. This particular dev blog came out in 2017, so of course there are going to be many changes that have no doubt transpired as development has continued throughout. Now, Botanians are inspired by Celtic people, and as a result, they are going to be a little bit rough around the edges. They're going to be very good at using their longbows, which is definitely going to be something I'm interested in. However, I'm not entirely convinced by their armaments, because they're probably not going to have a very great deal of defensive prowess. So they're going to be kind of similar to the Vaegirs from Mount & Blade Warband, which is... I don't know. They're going to be very, very good in terms of their longbowmen, or in terms of their bowmen in general, but maybe their infantry is going to leave a little bit to be desired. But we're going to take a look at the troop trees on the Bannerlord wiki in just a second, but we're just going to take a look here. One of the Botanian minor factions is the Wolfskins, a society of young warriors who have left their clans to live a life of freedom and violence in the woods. So long as they live as wolves, for example, eating no cooked meat, sleeping under no roof, and wearing no woven cloth, they are exempt from the laws of men. And the Wolfskins are inspired by the Fianna, a fighting brotherhood who were the stars of a major Irish saga. It treats them as heroes, but they also have a dark side, extorting money from clans who are interested in mundane things like marriage and crops, and don't have time to fight. Okay, so I personally feel like the way that they're going about each and every faction is really, really cool, because what's happening is that apart from the major faction, there are a wide variety of minor factions that are also included in that particular territory. So the Botanians, for example, have these guys called the Wolfskins, and maybe another one as well. But we'll have a see when the game actually comes out about that. But anyway, physics-based combat systems. I am really looking forward to that. That is going to be a separate talk video, which is going to be not in this one, so I'm going to talk about the combat system in that. But the cool thing about that is that it's going to make everything so much more visceral, and playing as a Botanian is probably going to then be very themed. It's going to be very themed about that. It's going to be very, very vicious, very aggressive, because they're all about raiding. They're all about conquering things, and they don't really focus on having actual architecture in their towns. So that's also a thing that we need to look at. So we're going to take a look at the wiki now. Alright, so it does actually say here, as you see, it is possible that the Vaegirs inherited their good light infantry and excellent archers from the Botanians. Now, of course, we are not, unfortunately, able to check out the stats of each of these troops, but we can take a look at where Botania is located on the map, and we also know who the ruler is, and his name is King Caladog. Alright, so this is the map of Bannerlord, and you can quite clearly see that Botania does have a pretty significantly less, well, shall we say, dominant place in the entirety of Calradia. So it is going to be a bit difficult, I suppose, to play as Botania, because they do have less territory to expand from. But for those of you that really, really desire a challenge, and if you're going to become a vassal of Botania or even a mercenary, then that's definitely something to think about. I personally am not that big a fan of Botania so far, because I have never really liked or enjoyed playing with units that are very lightly armored, because I feel like they are going to die very fast. But of course, that could just be a maybe a little bit of bias on my part, because I have played mods for Mount & Blade Warband in the past, and whenever there's been a faction that has kind of focused on lightly armored units, they usually get cut down really quickly. So I'm going to be very interested to see whether this is indeed the case with the Battanians. So let's take a look at their troop trees. So unfortunately, as I say, you can't take a look at their stats just yet because there are no stats to look at. But we can take a look, and they become clan warriors for their infantry, and then they go into warriors. Now, this is what's going on with Tailworlds right now. They're doing a much better job at balancing the troop trees out so that every single army has a really nice feeling to it. I know that seems a little bit vague, and it's meant to, because basically what they're trying to do is split each troop tree into 4 different sections, or at the most 4 different sections, maybe even 5. It depends. It depends on which faction you're looking at. I think the Empire, which we will look at later on in this video, I think the Empire has a very significant troop tree, and they don't generally focus on that much. They focus on all kinds of things. They even have 2 ranged units that are... This is crazy. This is crazy. Anyway, we're going to take a look at that, as I say, later on. So the Battanians then go into horsemen. So as we see here, we have Battanian scouts, horsemen. They're obviously going to be their light cavalry. And that's also something that we definitely need to talk about. The developers at Tailworlds are going to be changing how significant light versus heavy horses end up being. Because at the moment, when you're playing Warband, the greatest thing to do is either to get a really heavily armored horse, or to get something that has a good amount of armor, but also a decent amount of speed. You never really want to use a light horse, unless you are playing as a horse archer or something along those lines. But even then, you're going to need to be very cautious about what you do with that particular horse, because lighter horses really do die very, very quickly. And what they're going to do is they're going to make it possible to basically choose between the different horse types. And I know you can do that already, but the light horses die very fast, and the heavy horses are just generally better in every single way, with the exception of maybe a little bit of speed. So for example, the light horses might have 45 speed, and then the heavy horse has like 38 or something. And you really, do you care about the 7 speed? No, you probably don't care about the 7 speed, when the heavy horse has about 50 armor and the light horse has about 15. So that's the kind of thing that they are looking to change. So people have to make a much more concerted choice when it comes to actually choosing your horse, because there are factions, for example the Aserai, that do have the ability to create unique horses that have actual unique stats. And that is definitely something that I am very excited about, because I'm wondering whether you can become some sort of horse breeder, perhaps, and then you can sell the horses for a very nice profit. Maybe you can become a really, really rich merchant that way, or something along those lines. But anyway, that's enough about the horses for the moment. Otherwise, the Battanian warriors do become picked warriors and then trained spearmen. So, for the most part here, these guys are not going to have a very significant siege force, because you can see that right here. The horsemen, they're probably going to be equipped with spears of some kind, and the spearmen, well, they're going to be equipped with spears of some kind. They probably will have a form of maybe a falchion, or maybe something along those lines, maybe a short sword of some kind. But that is still going to prove a bit difficult to penetrate enemy defenses. But of course, that is also something that I want to talk about in another video, where we are going to be discussing the siege mechanics and the siege changes in general. Now, otherwise, we have the Battanian Wildling, and that upgrades into the Battanian Raider, and then you have a choice between two different troop lines, where you go into the Battanian Skirmisher or the Battanian Woodrunner. I would assume that these are the bowmen that was talked about previously, and the Battanians are very, very good at using their bows. So these are going to be kind of like, as I say, like the Vaegirs. And the Vaegirs, we know they're fantastic with their archers. They're really, really deadly with their archers. So these guys are definitely going to be the, not the equivalent, but kind of the, you know, the pseudo Vaegir faction, I suppose, with a little bit more, maybe a little bit more focus on Maneuverability? Maybe. It really depends, because I'm not entirely sure what this is going to be. I assume that this is going to be some kind of light infantry or something like that, because we do have trained spearmen right here, so if we do have the Falksman, then I would assume that that's going to be a kind of skirmisher type unit, maybe equipped with thrown weapons or something like that, because I can't imagine a Celtic kind of inspired faction not having thrown weapons of some kind, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, personally, I'm not a huge Britannia fan. Maybe that's just me right now, because I don't really have that much information about the statistics of these troops. Usually I will take a look at statistics before I make a judgment about a faction or things like that, but I'm not, I don't know. I don't really like the style of them either, but that is just personal preference, of course. I don't really know how they are going to act in battle. I guess relatively similar to the Vaegirs, but yes, it says here, the Britannians are based on different Celtic peoples, in particular from the early medieval times. Their settlements have been described as a mixture of medieval and ancient Celtic. It appears that by the time of Warband, the Britannians have been completely wiped out, or more likely conquered and assimilated by the Vlandians and the Sturgians, who would mix with the locals, eventually creating the Swadian, Rodok, and Vaegir cultures. Exactly. So that's exactly what's going on here. So you can see on the map, Britannia is basically where, I think it's where Ravadin is, isn't it? I think it's where Ravadin is, and it's kind of like next to like Radigir Castle and things like that. So it's basically taking up a little bit of the territory of the Vaegirs, and then Sturgia comes in from the top there, maybe with Rivercheg in the north, and then you have Wurcheg over in the northwest of the Sturgian territory right around here, and then of course Vlandia is very, very much Swadian territory and Rodok territory. So yeah, that's I don't know. As I say, I probably would not be. I don't know. I'm probably not going to be playing as the Britannians when Bannerlord comes out, but who knows? Things can change. Let's move on to the next faction. Alright, so this dev blog also came out in 2017, and, well, I can assume that a lot of things may have changed by this point, but this is the Khuzait Khanate. These guys are the premier horse archers, and if you have been on my channel for a while, you will know that I have a rather particular disdain for horse archers in general, mainly because they are extremely good at what they do, and I respect that. I respect that they're very skillful at keeping out of your range and basically making it very difficult to pin them down. That is their job, after all, on the battlefield, is it not? Yes, it is. Anyway, what Tailworlds have mentioned in this particular dev blog is, apart from all of the background story, which I might recommend that you read because it is very cool to give you that sort of immersion and atmosphere about the particular faction, but what they've mentioned specifically, which interests me, is the changes to horse archers. Because basically what I would like to do is, if I'm going to be playing with some of the Khuzait Khanate, I mean, let's face it, it's Bannerlord. I'm going to be playing it a huge amount. So, you know, I'm probably going to be ending up playing all kinds of different factions, all kinds of different combinations, and so on and so forth. Anyway, this particular sentence right here interests me like no one's business. With this in mind, Bannerlord is working to make control of the battlefield more important, so that skirmishing is usually a prelude to a clash, and horse archer armies are exciting both to command and to fight. Now that's very important to me, because, as I've just said, horse archers are extremely good at keeping themselves out of harm's way, and especially if you are playing as a faction that is extremely slow moving. For example, let's say the Nords. The Nords in Mount and Blade Warband are very slow on the battlefield because they have no cavalry to speak of. So usually if you don't want to use another faction's units, like you don't want to use the Swadians, Swadian's cavalry, or you don't want to use the Vaegir's knights, or anything else like that, then you're going to need to use mercenary cavalry, and they're very expensive. So generally, if you want to just create a pure Nord army, you're going to be very slow. And so if you as a Nord player decide, hey, I'm going to take my huge amounts of Nord Huskarls and I'm going to go and attack the Khuzait Khanate, Yeah, that's... I mean, it's going to go fine, because in general, in native Warband, the horse archers are not exactly smart, but if you were to play a mod that incorporates the Khuzait Khanate or any other horse archer faction, and then also play as an infantry-based faction against them with the horse archer fix, you're never going to kill those guys. You're never going to kill those guys unless they run into a tree stupidly, or they run to the edge of the battlefield and get stopped by the invisible wall. That's the only way that you can kill a horse archer as an infantry unit in those kinds of situations. And this sentence, as I've said, is very exciting because it means that they know that that is an issue. They know that the horse archer is a very strong unit in general. If you're skilled as a horse archer, or if the AI is particularly skilled as playing with it, because if you're playing on a very flat battlefield, like a plains battlefield, a desert battlefield, or something like that, then a horse archer is going to have all the speed and all the space that they could ever want. And Tailworlds knows that this is definitely something that they need to look at, and I'm very encouraged about that, which means that if I am going to be playing as an infantry-based faction, which is not even present in Bannerlord anymore, because there is no infantry-only focused sort of faction like the Nords. Every single faction has a horse kind of unit, which is kind of amazing to me. So yeah, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on anyway. So yeah, horse archers, definitely something that I'm very excited about, and the ability to, control the battlefield is so important going forward in Bannerlord, and that is definitely something that I'm also very, very keen to see in action, because they have talked about adding in a morale system, and there have been mods that have added morale systems into the game. Most notably, I have played, most recently should I say, 108 Heroes. 108 Heroes is like a ancient China kind of mod, and it's really, really cool the way that they have instituted so many different gameplay elements. And in that, there is a morale system, and the morale system can cause units to become confused, it can cause them to surrender in general, and so on and so forth. And I think Bannerlord is trying to implement something like that, so that if you pull off a particularly crazy maneuver, so let's say you have, I'm going to use warband terminology in this case, let's say you have a whole bunch of Swadian knights. Let's say you have the top tier of the top tier cavalry, and you charge headlong into a line of, I don't know, Vajir archers, and you kill, I don't know, 20 of them in under 10 seconds. Let's say you kill like a whole bunch. And in the new system with Bannerlord, what that's going to do is that's going to cause unrest. It's going to cause the enemy to become shaken. And it is maybe going to cause some of them to rout as well, dependent on the situation, because of how many units you were able to kill in such a short span of time. So that is definitely something I'm looking forward to. I think the horse archer changes are going to be really cool if they can do it properly, because, as I say, I don't want horse archers to be completely invincible, but I also don't want them to be useless, because I'd like a completely balanced sort of unit, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, we're going to take a look at their units, and we'll see what they're all about. Alright, so the Khuzait Khanate, they are located here in the northeastern section of Calradia, and, well, they are pretty large in their territory size, and they border Stygia, Northern Empire, and Southern Empire. I think that's a pretty nice place to be honest, because they only have, well, they do have 3 factions attacking them. I'm going to talk more about where each faction is located a little bit later on when we have looked at more of the factions, but it seems like they've got a pretty decent location, a little bit, I'm going to say much better, should I say, better than Botania, because Botania is surrounded on all sides by all kinds of aggression, so that's going to be kind of harsh for them. But otherwise, let's take a look at the Khuzait Khanate. So, if you take a look here, we have the Khuzait Nomad and the Khuzait Tribal Warrior and Footman. So, the Nomad goes into the Tribal Warrior, which then goes into any kind of horse unit. So you can see that right there. And the horse unit then will level up into either horse archers or into lancers. So very Khuzait Khanate-esque. However, this is where it gets really cool because, of course, as I've said, the Khuzait Khanate, they're pretty bad in sieges, aren't they? Yes, they're pretty bad in sieges because all of their units are cavalry. Every single one of them is cavalry. The one good thing about the Khuzait Khanate for sieges is the fact that they have the Khuzait Lancer. The Khuzait Lancer is a pretty, I'm going to say it's a below average infantry unit, but it is capable of leveling up extremely quickly, and it is very cheap to level up as well. So if you want a big amount of very cheap, decent enough infantry to go into a siege with, then a Khuzait Lancer is pretty fast to level up in comparison to, for example, a Nord Huskarl. But a Nord Huskarl is probably going to be able to kill 3 times as many units as the Khuzait Lancer does. But they have fixed this. Tailworlds have looked at the Khuzait Khanate and they've been like, okay, look at this. This faction only has cavalry. That's not going to work, is it? No, it's not going to work. So instead, what they've done is they've added the Khuzait Footman, which will then level up into Khuzait Marksman eventually, and the Khuzait Darkhan, which is definitely a great change. A great change, because that basically makes it so that the Khuzait Khanate are now actual threats when it comes to siege warfare. Because in the original warband, you're going to have the Khuzait Khanate. And let's say you own a town and you are playing as the Nords. So let's say you own a town and you're the Nords and you have a smallish garrison. So let's say you have 80 to 100 units or something like that, and you have mostly mid to high tier units. And then the enemy has about 300 because they've come with, like, I don't know, 3 vassals or something like that. And they are from the Khuzait Khanate. And they try to siege you, right? They try to besiege that town. You're just going to laugh. You're just going to laugh at them because they can't really do anything with that force against such a heavy infantry-focused faction like the Nords. And they can't really do much about against most, really, because they just have cavalry, and their archers are not particularly good when it comes to being on foot. They're most powerful when they are on their mounts, and in a siege, that's not going to happen. So, really like these changes. I like the fact that there's a marksman and that there's a Darkhan. I, of course, do not know what their stats are all about this time around, so, you know, we're going to have to wait and see what goes on with that. But the marksman and the Darkhan are reassuringly great for me, because if I do end up, you know, playing as a horse archer and joining the Khuzait Khanate, which is, I'm going to say, a little bit unlikely at the moment. I think it is going to be a bit unlikely for me, because as I say, I'm not particularly good at shooting on the back of a horse, but maybe it's going to be a little bit easier in Bannerlord, as the animations have been significantly improved, and the handling and all that wonderful stuff. So yeah, there's also that. Anyway, minor factions, the Kara Khuzits. The Kara Khuzits are the minor faction in the Khuzait Khanate, and otherwise, there you go. That's the Khuzait Khanate. I'm gonna say that if the Batanians were like a 5 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 for me, then the Khuzait Khanate are definitely a 7 out of 10 in regards to how willing or how much I would like to play as them. So the Batanians are definitely in last place for me, and the Khuzait Khanate are, well, now in first, but they're not going to be first for long, let's just say that. Let's move on to the next faction. Alright, so this time we're going to take a look at Vlandia. Now, Vlandia is definitely one of my favorite factions, but here's the problem with Vlandia. Everyone is going to play as them. I think everyone is going to play as them because they are just really, really good, in my opinion. They come with crossbowmen, they come with heavy cavalry, they come with, they come with sergeants as well. Some of their high-tier infantry are sergeants. So basically, if you are a warband player and you know a little bit about warband, these are basically Rhodoks and Swadians combined. And you can imagine how powerful that is going to be. You just imagine the Swadian knights combined with the Rhodok sharpshooters, combined with the Rhodok sergeants. You're never going to be able to take a castle from the Vlandians. I mean, it's going to be extremely difficult either way because they do have some amazing crossbowmen. So that is definitely going to be something to think about. The Vlandians, I think, after, I mean, I've read about all the other factions as well, and so far, the Vlandians are probably, in my opinion, the most powerful faction that you're going to be seeing in Bannerlord, with the exception of potentially the Empire themselves, because the Empire, as we'll get to later on in this video, is pretty strong themselves. So we'll see how it goes, but of the factions that are not completely massive, you know, because of course the Empire does have Western, Southern, and Eastern Empire, so it's all split into 3 different factions. But the point is that at the moment, I feel like Vlandia, apart from the Empire, is probably the most powerful because they are just so good at what they do. Crossbowmen, heavy cavalry, that's a very, very good combination. Anyway, the Vlandians control slightly more territory than the other factions, but we've seeded the ground for a lot of internal dissent among them. The world-weary Vlandian king, Dirtheart, will have to deal with barons who are more interested in pursuing their own agendas than fighting under his banner. Mount and Blade Warband also tried to model this herding cats aspect of medieval warfare, but some people found the implementation, in which lords could wander off on their own accord, to be frustrating. In Bannerlord, the new influence mechanism will let the player spend influence to keep large armies of quarrelsome vassals in the field, but that resource is limited. Alright, so that particular paragraph right there, I think that that is a fantastic way of doing things, because as I've said, the Batanians, they may have a small amount of territory, but does it matter if all of their vassals are working together in unison like a very, very strong organized machine? Then it is going to be more powerful than the Vlandians, who could potentially have some of their vassals decide, hey, I don't actually want to help with this particular siege. I'm going to go off and have a feast, King Harlaus. Yes, you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, the point is that this new influence mechanism is going to make all the difference to allowing yourself to control vassals directly and actually tell them what to do. And of course, what they've said here is that the resource is limited, so you can't do that all the time. And I would assume that there is a way to earn more, or maybe it's a weekly thing where you get more influence every single week, or maybe it's tied into enterprises or how successful you are in business or in battles or whatever the case may be. I don't know what it is at the moment because we have not yet touched upon that, and I will do that. I will be doing that in a future video. We'll talk about all the new mechanisms and things like that. Okay, so otherwise, the Vlandians will have their share of minor factions. As with the Batanians and Khuzait, these serve to emphasize the origins of the kingdom. For example, players who wish to emulate the adventurers who founded the Vlandian and Norman empires can seek their fortunes with the Company of the Golden Boar, mercenaries who are based on medieval outfits like the Catalan or Free Companies. That's really cool. I like that a lot. I think that's a really cool way to go about it. And I really like the armor of the Vlandians as well. Maybe that's just me. And otherwise, what they are going to be using, the Vlandians are going to be using couch lances. Couch lances are going to be extremely powerful with these. And in Bannerlord, we're trying to ensure there's a trade-off between specializing as light or heavy cavalry. This is what I was talking about previously in the Khuzait section. Light horses will be noticeably more maneuverable, but also more averse to physical contact. And even the best heavy cavalry should think twice about crashing into a wall of spears. Even the Normans could not break the shield wall at Hastings, instead wearing it down with combined arms and feints. Still, used properly, a force of Vlandians can be a steamroller. Just be sure to keep them focused on your enemies instead of your own lands. Yeah, so that's, of course, another thing to think about. Because as we've just said, there's going to be some internal dissent among the vassals of Vlandia. And so if you become a vassal of Vlandia and you decide to work with them, then you gotta expect some of those vassals to be a little bit backstabby, maybe. We'll see about that. But otherwise, if they are all working together, if you have enough influence to get them to work as a team, then they're probably going to be relatively unstoppable. Just like I said previously, I feel like the Vlandians are extremely powerful, and as I say, maybe the most powerful, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, light horses will be noticeably more maneuverable. So this is definitely something I'm a little bit wary of at the moment, because I know that in general it's going to be a bit difficult to balance this, because if light horses are extremely maneuverable, and I'm talking about way more maneuverable than the current ones that you can play as in Warband, then there's probably not going to be that much point in playing as a heavy cavalry focused mounted unit. Because if you think about it, let's say, I'm just going to bring up a random value here. I have no idea about the stats at the moment of these horses. So let's say that you have 50 maneuverability as a light horse, and you have like 20 armor or something like that. And let's say then they swap the stats around for the heavy cavalry. So let's say the heavy cavalry has 20 maneuverability and 50 armor. So let's say it's just swapped around completely. In that case, what would you prefer? Would you prefer to be able to turn really easily? Would you be able to, weave in and out of combat, hit and run attacks, being able to be a little bit quicker on turning with your couch lance and things like that? Because of course you do have to remember that the light horses are going to be much faster than the heavy horses as well. So it might very well come down to a decision of, well, not much, because the heavy horse might be so slow and so unmaneuverable that it is just not going to be worth it. But that is going to change the entire gameplay situation in regards to Warband, because Warband, generally it's a much better idea to either have a heavy hunter horse or to have a fully armored horse, because the heavy hunter horse, in my opinion, has probably the best or one of the best balanced stats that you can even get as a horse in the original game. And if you do go for a much heavier horse, then you're going to find that it's quite slow, so it might not even be possible to even couch with that. So that's definitely something to think about there. I'm thinking that they are probably going to do extensive testing on the horses, because it is mount and blade. I mean, come on, you've got to make sure that the mounts are all working right. Alright, so we're going to take a look at Vlandir's position on the map. I really like their position on the map so far. Can you tell that I'm a bit biased towards Vlandir? Yeah, I am a bit. I don't know why. I have no idea why I'm biased towards them. I think it's probably because I'm a little bit nostalgic for heavy cavalry, because in my original series that started my entire journey in Mount and Blade Warband, I was playing with Swadians. I was playing with Swadians, and Vlandir is very, very much Swadian, and so I'm kind of interested to see what kind of changes Vlandir has had in comparison to the Swadians. But anyway, I like their position on the map right here. They are only really up against the Battanians and the Western Empire. Not too much about anything else really, apart from on the fringe, because Sturgia is up at the top there, and Azurai is down at the south. So there's going to be quite a few conflicts between Battania and Western Empire, I assume, but not really anything that much else. Maybe it really depends. And maybe the other reason why I kind of like Vlandir is because they're super far away from the Khuzait Khanate, and that means I have to fight less horse archers. Maybe that's the reason. Nah, it's probably not. Anyway, this is a pretty cool faction in my opinion, literally just because the troop trees, they're very simple. Basically, if you want a skirmisher, then this skirmisher is going to go into the vanguard, which is the heavy cavalry unit, and it just goes straight up. Look at that. It just goes from recruit immediately into a skirmisher. I don't know whether the skirmisher is going to be on a mount. I assume it probably is going to be on a mount, because otherwise you're choosing between infantry and infantry, and I don't think that's what they're going to do. I think the skirmisher is going to be a light cavalry unit, probably equipped with probably like a long sword or something like that. Nothing too damaging. Maybe a light lance even? Maybe a light lance. I think the scout would probably be more likely to have the light lance, because then you're going to be able to see them couch enemies to death in the second tier. I think that's way too powerful. So the third tier is probably going to have like a light lance or something like that, and then you have light cavalry, and then you have the vanguard, which is the heavy cavalry in the end. That's a very easy way to level up in the Vlandian troop tree. But of course, if you don't want to do that, you can go and you can decide to go for the Vlandian footman, and then you can go for crossbowman, eventually all the way to the sharpshooter. And this is where it gets really interesting, they've decided to split the infantry troop tree in two. So once it gets to the third tier, you're going to get Vlandian infantry, and then you're going to get the billman or the swordsman. So the billman is a polearm / two-handed user. It's most likely going to be using a bill of some kind. And then the Vlandian Vulgier is going to be using a polearm, like a bardiche or something along those lines. I love bardiches. I feel like bardiche is a fantastic weapon. So there's definitely something for me there, because I think the bardiche is great. It has like a bonus against shields, and I don't think it can crush through blocks. But of course there's going to be a whole wide variety of different weapon stats in Bannerlord, and we're going to talk about the weapon stats and things like that in another video as well. So anyway, Vlandian Swordsman, they're going to be pretty cool. Vlandian Sergeant, they're going to be absolutely fine. Very solid unit. They're going to be very similar, in my opinion, to the Rodok Sergeant, and they're going to be focused on defense over offense, in my opinion. At least, that's what I think. That's what I think they should be focused on. The sharpshooters are going to be standard sort of thing. They're going to be pretty good, but they're not going to be the best, I don't think, at ranged combat, because I don't think Tailworlds is going to want to have the strongest cavalry, or maybe the strongest cavalry. I think they probably will be, and then have the strongest crossbowmen, and then followed by some solid infantry. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they're going to look at this very, very closely and make it much more balanced than it potentially was in Warband, because everyone knows Swadian knights are the business. They are really, really strong, and you can basically just wipe out anyone on a field of battle with some Swadian knights. You can have 20, 30 of these guys, and you can pretty much win a lot of battles just with those, just with those kind of backing you up in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, the Vlandians are looking really, really strong at the moment, and I'm going to be very interested to see what kind of stats they come out with eventually. So let's move on to the next faction. Alright, so for this section, we're going to be focusing on Sturgia. Now, these guys, they're going to be probably my second favorite faction in Bannerlord, behind the Vlandians. And I did not even give the Vlandians a rating in the previous section. So I'm going to say that the Vlandians are probably like a 9 out of 10 for me, maybe 9.5 out of 10, something like that for me wanting to play as them. But that does not mean that I'm going to end up playing as them, because, as I say, they may just be maybe a little too powerful. I don't know. We're gonna have a look when it first comes out, and we'll see at that point. Anyway, Sturgia, they are based on the Nords. These guys are gonna be fantastic with their heavy infantry. They're going to have really good heavy infantry, and it's going to be extremely difficult to take them down when they are in a shield wall formation. It's going to be one of those things where you are quaking in your boots. If you are playing as the Battanians, for example, and the Battanians, as we know, do have relatively similar archer units to the Vaegirs, and if you take these guys, these Sturgians, and you go up against the Battanians who have those archers, these guys are going to absolutely mow them down with their crazy good infantry. So these guys are really cool. I like these guys quite a bit because they are very much about raiding. They're very much about warfare. They're just very, just very aggressive. And I quite like that quite a bit, because that's going to make things a little more dynamic. Because then in the beginning, if you're playing as the Sturgians, you're not really going to then be like, okay, so I should probably go and trade this stuff over here and trade that stuff over here and so on and so forth. Instead, you're going to be much more focused on fighting things, in my opinion. You're going to be using a, kind of combat economy. It's kind of like more of a combat economy. So all the loot that you get from fighting will then be used to pay your troops and so on and so forth. I think that's a really cool way of doing things, and maybe that's the way that Sturgia is going to be here. So, as you see here, we've been working on the close-up foot slogging, should we say, side of Mount and Blade. Look out for high-tier AI opponents bashing you with their shield in the teeth, following it up with a blade going into your ribs. Disciplined infantry will be more likely to stay in formation and will leave a space for a player in their ranks so you don't get crowded too closely by your allies. That is something I'm really loving right there. I love that change because as it stands right now, you need to be very proficient at ordering your troops around with the various commands that you currently have in Warband. So in other words, stand closer, stand further apart, advance 10 paces, retreat 10 paces, and so on and so forth. You can use all of those intricate commands to make it easier for the player to stand in between your units. And that takes a bit of work, but it is possible. You can do it. But I'm really, really happy to see that Tailworlds is looking at that and making it a little more organic in the way that your troops will see you, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, we should probably get out the way, or we should just leave a little bit of a space for the player. That seems like a really cool idea. Otherwise, now the Nords were a favorite faction in Warband. We know a lot of people are drawn to Vikings. The Blood Eagles, the Shipboard, Funeral Pyres, the Berserkers, eager to join the feasting at Valhalla. Stygia is Nordic influenced, but it's not really a Viking state. The Nordlands are off of the map, for the present anyway, and they wouldn't really form the kind of proto-feudal kingdom that the Bannerlord factions represent. But if players want to have a West Scandinavian-style play experience, the raiding, the companions, the ring swords, two-handed axes, which I am personally very excited about, Valsgard helmets, Hullbolks, and Raven banners will all be there. Among the Stygian minor factions are the Skåderbroder, a mercenary brotherhood based on the possibly legendary Jomsk Vikings of the Baltic, not the Nordic. The Finnic tribes, meanwhile, are represented by the Sons of the Forest, a semi-nomadic clan that practices swidden slash-and-burn agriculture in the depths of the woods. At any rate, there should be plenty of allies and plenty of enemies for players who want to win their inheritance with the blade in this cold land of deadly opportunity. So that's something I very much like. I like the warlike tendencies of the Stygians. I feel like their heavy infantry are going to be extremely visceral with the way that they attack. And, if I'm not mistaken, pretty sure Stygia has Berserker units, and I am a huge fan of Berserker units. Alright, so first off, we're going to take a look at where Stygia is on the map. We've seen the map a couple of times now, so you probably already know where it is, but I'm just going to highlight it and then comment on what I actually think, what the positioning's kind of like here. So Stygia is, of course, going to be in the top of the map. They're going to be in the north, where it's cold, where it's snowy, and they are going to be kind of taking most of the Nordic territory, with the exception of, they're going to be taking all of the Nordic territory, yeah. All of the Nordic territory right here, maybe with the exception of a couple of things in the Britannian little border right there. And otherwise, then they have the Northern Empire, the Khuzait Khanate, Vlandia a little bit, and Britannia mostly bordering them. So, personally, I feel like this is actually fine. I think this is a very good area because, let's face it, if indeed Tailworlds decides to come out with DLC. So let's say they decide to come out with a DLC that actually adds an additional area, an additional territory, maybe the Nordlands themselves, because that's what they mentioned in the dev blog. They mentioned that, the Nordlands are not there at the moment, but they might be in the future. I don't know whether that was a little bit of a hint to that, but it could be pretty cool for them to add on additional factions, additional territories as the game's life cycle continues. Once it's released, of course. Anyway, Stygia's position seems pretty solid to me. I am kind of continuing to feel sorry for Britannia right here because, as I say, they are up against it quite literally with being up against the Stygians, the Vlandians, the Western Empire, and the Northern Empire. They're all having very strong units, and I don't know how Britannia is going to fight against these guys. I guess with numbers, perhaps? Maybe Britannia has more numbers than the other factions, but I suppose we'll find out as we go forward. Anyway, Stygian military. What do we have here? So we have the Stygian recruit, which goes into two things. It can go into warriors, or it can go into woodsmen. Woodsmen are going to focus on mobility and ranged combat. So the woodsmen are going to go into veteran bowmen, which are very similar, I would assume, to the Nord veteran bowmen. So they're going to be pretty good in melee combat. They're probably going to be equipped with a two-handed axe, or maybe an axe and a shield or something like that. And then otherwise you have the Stygian Horse Raider. Now, as I said previously, every single faction tends to have a cavalry unit of some kind, and I really love that change. I think that that is fantastic because that makes it possible so that the Sturgians are not going to get absolutely murdered by the Khuzait Khanate, because the Khuzait Khanate, as we know, they are horse archers. They are primarily cavalry most of the time, and if you have, let's say you are just wanting to have some fun, and as a result you are going for literally like a pure infantry focused army. So let's say you're using veteran warriors and berserkers only. Let's say you're only using those guys, and then you come up against like a Khuzait Khanate vassal or something along those lines, and he's got 100 horse archers or something like that, and it's just going to be a massacre, because unless they make a mistake, as I've said, they're going to murder every single one of those berserkers. And the warriors might take a little bit more taking down because they probably have shields, but the berserkers are just going to die super quickly. So I really like this change because that means that you can have a contingent. You know, if you are playing with a horse yourself, if you have a horse, then you can lead these horse raiders in some kind of flanking maneuver, or you can chase down horse archers with these guys, and you can try and limit the amount of damage that they're able to do to your berserkers, and maybe even to your bowmen as well. So I think that's a really cool change that they've done, and it makes all of the factions much more balanced in general. I think that's just so good. That is a really, really good change. Okay, so otherwise, apart from that, the berserkers. The berserkers are going to be much more useful in sieges. And you may be asking yourself, why are you saying that? Surely not, because the berserkers are going to have no shield, right? They're probably not going to have a shield, let's face it. They probably won't. So let's say they go into a siege. They're going to get shot almost immediately. Let's say they're going up against Vlandia. Those crossbowmen are going to tear them apart with their extremely powerful crossbows, aren't they? Well, maybe not. Maybe not, because the siege warfare has changed so dramatically in Bannerlord with the addition of destructible environments and various other siege engines. And again, I'm going to talk about siege warfare in another video. But with all of these additional options, berserkers have become so much more useful because they can be used as shock troops. You know, they can be used as shock troops going in to an alternate path, shall we say. So they don't even need to go in the front. You could take them as a commando unit by yourself with, I don't know, 15, 20 berserkers with you, maybe with a couple of veteran warriors as well, just in case you come up against a contingent of enemy archers or something like that, and then you can use the veteran warriors' shields to prevent your berserkers from dying that easily. So you can do sort of maneuvers like that, kind of, maybe. I'm hoping that that is indeed possible, because if it is, then that's great, because that makes the berserker a unit that people will actually use in comparison to berserker units in various mods that really are not used that often. Because when it gets to like late game, and your character is level 40, and you have basically the best gear that you can get, and let's just say that we're talking about Prophecy of Pendor here, and let's say you have, I don't know, a huge amount in power draw or something, and you have a horse, you have a Noldor horse or something, and you have one of the best bows in the game. You shoot one of these berserkers in the head, and they're probably going to die either in one shot or in 2 shots. And it has done nothing. It has done absolutely nothing. And that is indeed the problem with berserkers. And I'm very much hoping that in a siege situation, with these additional options, with this additional siege equipment and everything, that the berserker is going to gain a role in siege warfare. And I know that in general, even in Warband, berserkers technically could have a place, because you could have an overwhelming amount of archers yourself, and then you could have a contingent of berserkers go up the ladder or go up the siege tower with some veteran warriors and just hope that they survive. But that's the point. You shouldn't have to hope that they survive. You should have to, you should have the option to use tactics or some kind of strategy to prevent your units from dying, rather than just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. At least that's my thought on it. Anyway, Sturgia has a really cool banner as well. I personally feel I like it quite a bit. So they are definitely one of my favorite factions so far, but just because of the Berserkers. I really like them a lot. And they do have the heavy infantry as well, which are going to be pretty fun to see in shield wall formation. And they have a whole bunch of minor factions as well. So that's also cool. All right, so let's move on to the next faction. I'm going to give Sturgia like an 8 out of 10 so far, because as I say, I'm not entirely sure about the Berserkers being that useful in siege warfare. And of course, I'm going to say that the Horse Raiders and the Veteran Bowmen, they're going to be very much secondary units that you're not really going to want to have too many of unless you already have a significant amount of infantry, because let's face it, these bowmen and these horse raiders are never going to be as good as, for example, the Battanian bowmen or the Vlandian cavalry. So they are going to be used as more supplementary units over actual core units in your army. Alright, so we're going to take a look at the Aserai in this particular section. Now the Aserai are, in my opinion, very much Saranid. I mean, you can obviously tell that. They're very much inspired by the Saranids, inspired by Arabian folklore and various other things like that. You can see the background story of how they were inspired to create the Aserai. But what I'm interested in here is this. Mid-Eastern armies are popularly associated with horse archers, but in fact those only became prevalent about 2 centuries after the founding of Islam with the influx of Turks. The Arabs fought with short sword, long spear, and foot bow. Warriors prided themselves on their flexibility, fighting as light-mounted lancers or heavy footmen in formed ranks or as individual champions. Javelins, a favorite weapon of the Berbers, made their appearance in Islamic armies fairly early, and we have the Aserai use them as well. All in all, it's a mix of good troops, pretty well balanced across cavalry and infantry. The Arabs were famously proud of their horses, and the Aserai breeds, produced by pastures in Aserai lands, will have unique characteristics. Middle Eastern warriors wore a mix of armors, often under richly embroidered textiles. Bannerlord's physics model gives us new options in bringing the pageantry of these armies to life, with banners, horsetails, and robes fluttering in the desert breeze. Alright. So this is a really fantastic design for this faction. I like this faction a lot, actually. I'm probably not going to... I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I'm probably not going to be playing as them initially, but I might. I mean, that's the thing. They've got some really cool things that I am very intrigued by, and I'm very intrigued by this line right here. The Arabs were famously proud of their horses, and the Aserai breeds produced by pastures in Aserai lands will have unique characteristics. That's the thing that I was talking about previously in this video, where I referenced the Aserai having the ability to breed horses with some unique stats, and I really like that. I think that Bannerlord should have more of this. I think it should have more of this kind of thing, where every single faction has a particular specialty, a particular special item that they can potentially make. Maybe something like that, I don't know. I mean, this is just me throwing around suggestions here, but it doesn't really matter either way. The fact is that they are implementing a system where Aserai themselves will have unique horses, and these horses will be probably arguably better, or maybe arguably uniquely different than regular horses. So regular horses, I don't even know what kind of unique characteristics they're talking about here, but regular horses are going to have, what? Speed, maneuverability, armor, and maybe charge damage? That's probably it, right? Maybe they'll have stamina as well. It really depends on that, because as I said, they were, as I said in the Khuzait Khanate section, they were looking at balancing horse archers. And I'm thinking that they're probably going to be adding stamina to the horses, maybe? Maybe they'll add stamina to the horses to make them a little bit slower over time so that they are not always extremely fast. And maybe, in that case, the unique characteristic of the Aserai horses is going to be that they will be able to move quicker or longer for a lengthier period of time, perhaps. Maybe that is a thing that is going to happen, because if normal horses would be able to run around at full speed for about 5 minutes, let's say that's real time 5 minutes, let's say that the Aserai horses would be able to go for 10 minutes. That seems like a pretty cool, unique characteristic to me, because that will make them quite powerful, actually, in that case. Because if the Khuzait Khanate does not have a unique characteristic in their horses, then it's going to make the Aserai much more mobile than the Khuzait Khanate, and it's going to make the Khanate needing to be urgent. They need to be urgent, and it needs to be priority for them to win the battle extremely fast. So they can't just dawdle around. They can't just use their extreme mobility with their horse archers to wear down the enemy or anything like that. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm very intrigued by that. I think it could be really cool, and I don't know whether you're going to be able to breed horses yourself or whether you're going to be able to produce these unique Aserai breeds and then sell them to a merchant or something like that, like I was talking about previously. That would be pretty fun too, because if you want to create a merchant build, then playing in the Aserai territory and being able to become like this famous horse breeder or something like that, then that would be kind of cool. That would be kind of cool. So yeah, that's nice. Otherwise, they are going to be using javelins, and you know my opinion on horse archers. No, you know my opinion on thrown weapons. Thrown weapons are awful for me. I absolutely loathe them, and they loathe me as well. They certainly do. But I'm interested to see how javelins are going to respond and how they are going to act in the new engine for Bannerlord, because javelins in general, I love the idea. I love the idea of them, and I have tried so many times to use javelins and thrown weapons in general, but it has just never really worked out for me. But maybe that's just because the engine is not so good. I'm just blaming the engine now, even though I know it's my ineptitude. Alright, so let's take a look at the Aserai units. Alright, so here we are on the Aserai map, and we're going to take a look and see what kind of territory they have to deal with here. Now, I'm going to give Aserai a 10 out of 10 in their positioning. Their positioning is absolutely wonderful for them. It is really, really good. And I wouldn't be surprised if Aserai is going to be one of the factions that is left basically intact from the very start of the game. So when you start a game of Bannerlord and, 500 days later, Aserai is probably going to have lost maybe a couple of castles here or there, but they will not be anywhere near being eliminated, mainly because of their borders. Have you noticed this blue area right here? This blue area right here on the border of the Southern Empire and the Aserai, that is water. And unless there is the opportunity to use a boat to get across there, which might very well be the case, I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. They will probably be able to use boats and things. But anyway, if there isn't, then they have an absolutely fantastic time, because they only have to deal with the Southern Empire. And the Southern Empire, while they are probably going to be pretty strong, we haven't talked about them yet, but we will be in just a second. The Empire factions are generally going to be quite strong, and that's the reason why Aserai is going to have a pretty easy time of things, because Southern Empire is also bordering the Khuzait Khanate, the Northern Empire, and the Western Empire. And for the most part, they do have a pretty large area here, a pretty large area of border for the Southern Empire to go straight in to Aserai territory if they want to begin warlike tendencies, but they might very well just ignore the Aserai for the most part and focus on the Northern Empire, for example, because they really don't like each other, those factions. So that is very intriguing, and I just don't know. It really depends on what the AI decides to do. So that seems pretty cool to me anyway. All right, so let's take a look at their troops, and we're gonna... Ooh, yeah, okay, so yeah, right here, they do a similar thing to the previous faction that we looked at. Wasn't that Sturgia? Was that Sturgia? I think that was Sturgia just now. So yeah, they do a similar thing there where... Wait, was it Sturgia? No, I think it was someone else. I think it was the Vlandians or something like that. But anyway, this just goes straight down. So you have the slave soldiers, and then they go straight down. Trainee, seasoned, Mamluks, and then Ghazi. I don't know what these are. I assume the Mamluk is a mounted unit, but that is a bit weird because you have Aserai cavalry right here. So I'm not entirely sure how that goes. Oh, maybe it's like a hybrid unit. That's pretty cool, actually. That might be a hybrid unit. Because, yeah, I think that is a hybrid unit. So basically what that means is you can make Aserai tribesmen, and then you can go for infantry, or you can go for skirmishers, and then you can go for swordsmen, or you can go for archers, and then tribal horsemen. I assume the tribal horseman is a kind of horse archer, or maybe a thrown weapon specialist on a horse, something like that. And then the Fyhrr is probably going to be a skirmisher on a horse with thrown weapons, or something like that. And then you have the Aserai master archers, which is a foot archer, I would assume. Then the Aserai cavalry is probably going to be like a heavy cavalry of some kind. And then the Ghazi, I have no idea what this is going to be, but I just know that the Mamluk is a cavalry of some kind. At least in the Saranid kingdom it is, but maybe not in this. So it really depends on that. So personally, I'm liking this troop tree quite a bit, because as they said in the dev blog itself, they have solid, good mix of troops, and they're well balanced. And I think that that is going to be their main strength. This is definitely going to be a huge strength for them, because many other factions will have a weak point somewhere. And I'm looking at the Sturgians here. They're going to have weak archers, or should we say average archers and average cavalry. But the Aserai tend to have good units throughout, which is kind of like the Saranids. The Saranids are kind of similar in that way, where every single unit is good, you know, it's just good solid units. And with the exception of the Mamluks, of course. The Mamluks are slightly better than good. So yeah, that's actually looking pretty cool. I'm gonna give the Aserai maybe like an 8 out of 10 as well. I'm liking their territory positioning. I think their territory positioning is really good. So yeah, as I say, I think they're going to be a very good defensive faction for the most part in terms of their territory position, and in terms of their troops, yeah, they're solid. I mean, that's exactly what they're meant to be. They're meant to be solid. Whereas the Vlandians, they're concentrating on heavy cavalry, Batanians concentrating on being really good archers, Sturgians concentrating on heavy infantry, and of course the Khanate are going to be concentrating on horse archers and indeed cavalry in general. Whereas the Aserai, they seem to have good units everywhere, but we'll see what the stats are like later on. Now we're going to move on to the last factions, with the S, because we're going to be taking a look at the Empire. Alright, so the last faction that we have to look at here is the Empire. Now the Empire is split into 3 factions, and as far as I am aware, they all share the same troop trees. They all use the same troops, all use the same upgrade paths and things like that, and they should all use the same weapons and armor as well. That could potentially change. This devblog was from 2018, so who knows whether they've done some revisions on this or not, but I'm pretty interested to see what will be done with this faction, or with these factions, because they all have different leaders. There are 3 different leaders, and you can see here that the Empire is the last faction, or rather the last 3 factions to be looked at in our series. It is based on the classical tradition of Greece and Rome and their medieval successor, the Byzantines. There was a lot of change in over 2,000 years of history, obviously. Although the Roman Republic became a de facto empire under Augustus, vestigial remnants like the Senate persisted to the 1300s. Meanwhile, what started as a bureaucratic state, with prefects and governors appointed for very short terms, evolved into a de facto feudalism by the 11th century, with Byzantine magnates ruling fiefs and having military obligations like any count or duke in the West. The rules of succession, meanwhile, were never set in stone, which suits our purposes in the game very well. If a player has his or her eye on the purple, which they talk about previously in this dev blog as being taking the emperorship, in other words, being the emperor, there are lots of different ways of gaining legitimacy. The waning years of the Roman Republic, the time of Caesar, Antony, Octavius, Cleopatra, Cato the Younger, and Cicero have had a huge impact on Western political thinking and are a major inspiration for literature, so we've drawn a few characters from that era. But Byzantine rulers like Justinian and Alexios Komnenos, who brought the empire back from the brink, are equally fascinating personalities, as are the ruling empresses like Zoe and Irene. So then we go on to part 2 of the Empire here, and they talk about the units. Now, the units of the Byzantines, they're known for their cataphracts, okay? I think you might know that if you are a fan of Age of Empires, or if in general you have, know a little bit about history and things like that. But they are going to be focused on the cataphract units. So these cataphract units, they go into battle with full armor, with a lance, saber, and long-handled mace. That is exactly what these cataphract units are going to be deploying. You can see here, powerful heavy cavalry, sturdy spearmen and skirmishers, and our upgraded command system should give players a chance to experiment with combined arms. That's very interesting. I like that a lot, because that means that this faction is going to be for the strategists, in my opinion. This is going to be for the people that are much more into commanding an army in a strategic way, in a almost strategy game way, rather than playing it as like an action RPG sort of experience. Anyway, that's not to say that the other factions can't also do that, but this is very, very much, focused on that with the upgraded command system and everything. Anyway, improvements to the morale calculations, and this is what I was talking about previously in this video, such as a shock effect from taking down a large amount of troops at once, can make tactics such as flank charges more effective. Imperial cataphracts are also designed for opportunistic attacks that benefit from being timed more carefully than the Vlandian steamroller. We've given them two-handed Kontos lances a slight anachronism, as these are more late ancient than early medieval weapons, but we think it will add interesting variety. Now, without the shield, however, this is going to make the cataphracts very, very easy to kill for missile units, so that very well could be a bit of a problem. However, the cataphracts also come along with heavy maces, which I absolutely love. I am a big fan of blunt weaponry in Warband and its various mods. I think blunt weaponry is some of the most fun to use, literally just because it can knock people unconscious, so you can sell them for some ransom money. It can crush through blocks most of the time. The two-handed blunt weapons usually can crush through blocks, and they generally are much better against heavy armor. So if you are wanting to do massive damage to, for example, a Vlandian heavy cavalry, and they might very well be wearing plate armor or heavy armor at the very least, then a heavy mace from some of these cataphract units would be extremely powerful. And personally, I'm really liking the Empire. I don't think I'm going to be playing as them, but I really like their design. I like the fact that they are using the heavy maces, as I say. Not so much that they are using a two-handed lance. A two-handed lance is going to be pretty harsh against those units that are extremely good at sharpshooting. So, for example, you're probably going to see a lot of Batanian kills. The Batanians are going to kill a huge amount of these cataphract units before they even get to them, because they have no shield. So those marksmen that you can get with the Batanians, they're going to be extremely good against these guys, because they're going to be able to fire much faster than the Vlandian crossbowmen. They're going to be much more accurate as well. Because of them firing faster, they have more opportunities to hit the head. And in general, it feels like the Batanians are going to have a pretty decent time against the Empire, with the exception of maybe being not too good against their spearmen. But we'll see how that goes, because the spearmen, it depends on how the spear combat is in Bannerlord, because as it is in Warband, in Native, the spear combat is kind of awful. So we'll see how it goes, but what I've seen from various video footage, the spear combat has been refined to a very nice degree, and it might very well be something of a favorite of mine in the new game. So we'll see how that goes. And otherwise, this is something that is going to be touching on the siege combat just a little bit here, but I'm going to read it nevertheless, just so you get an idea as to what is going to be coming up in a future video. In Bannerlord, we've introduced a number of new ways to show this kind of accumulated investment. In other words, if you are allowing your city to grow, or if you're becoming more developed and getting more improvements and so on and so forth, we can vary a city's economic muscle with the amount of workshops it has, and its defense might, or defensive might, is shown by outer walls that can be one of 3 levels, with different scenes for each. Now that is something I adore. I think that is a fantastic idea, because that makes everything so much more dynamic, so much more organic as well, because if you, for example, have just taken a castle, and you don't have the opportunity to upgrade it, then it's going to be pretty easy for enemies to take back, but that just means you're going to have to fight harder, and you're going to have to invest a little bit more cash or resources or whatever the case may be to upgrade it to the next level, and then it's going to be even harder for them to take it back, and vice versa. If you're attempting to take something, you're going to have to be a bit careful. You're going to have to scout out, does this particular castle have level 2 walls, level 3 walls, level 1 wall? You know, if it has level 1 wall, then you're going to have an easy time, or maybe a slightly easier time at the very least. But yeah, I think that's a really cool thing. Not going to talk about it too much in this video, as I say, because we're focusing on the factions here, but I quite like the Empire as it is right now. I think the Empire is looking really cool. I like the architecture that they have going on here, and they are basically the Byzantines, aren't they? They're basically the Byzantines combined with the Romans, combined with the Greeks on a sort of scale like that. So it is cool. And to finish off this last dev blog here, before we take a look at the Empire's units, we're going to read this. An adventurer may make his or her name in the Outer Kingdoms, but to rise to the pinnacle of power in the game, a player will need eventually to deal in one way or the other with the Empire and its legacy. You may be an Attila who humbles it, a Justinian who restores it, or a Charlemagne who remakes it in a new form, in a new land. Don the purple robe or trample it into the dust under the hooves of your horse. That is your choice. So very much a case of Roman Empire split off into 3 different factions kind of thing. And let's take a look at their units, shall we? Alright, so I have just brought up the Southern Empire at the moment because, as I say, they basically have the same exact units in every single way. The only thing that is the difference is the ruler or their positioning on the map. So that's obviously going to be a thing. Anyway, the Southern Empire is ruled by Regia. Now, Regia is the widow of the previous emperor, and she was nominated by the people in her lands because her husband was assassinated by someone. No one knows who assassinated him, and so she became the empress in the Southern Empire. And then the Northern and the Western Empire, they each have their own ruler as well, and I believe that those were 2 generals that became the emperor because of their troops, because the Empire was a very militaristic faction in general, and they basically took everything extremely quickly. They took their territory extremely quickly, and yeah, so that's basically what happened with the Empire. They eventually split off when the Emperor was killed. So anyway, this is one of the most interesting troop trees that I have seen so far, and you would expect that to be the case considering the Empire is kind of like the big enemy that you might have to kill or take over the territory of to really achieve victory. So Imperial recruits, they go into militae, and they also go into skirmishers, and then the skirmishers go into bowmen, which then go into archers and crossbowmen. This is the thing that I was talking about previously, where I was saying that this faction, or one of the future factions that I was going to talk about, has 2 different ranged units. And I'm not talking about thrown weapons here, I'm talking about actual projectiles, which is kind of weird. Well, ammunition, shall we say, because technically thrown weapons are projectiles as well. But anyway, the point is that archers and crossbowmen, I think this is kind of weird. Personally, I think this is kind of weird, but on the other hand, this could be extremely powerful if used correctly, because if you just think about it, let's say you have 20 crossbowmen, 20 archers, and then you place them in a formation such as that, so that it basically makes it so that the crossbowmen are behind the archers, and so the crossbowmen get more opportunities to fire at the enemy, because I would assume that the archers are not going to have as much range as the crossbowmen, and they are of course going to be able to fire much faster than the crossbowmen themselves because they have to reload and everything. So this is pretty cool with the amount of synergy that you can get with these 2, but it is a bit weird in my opinion. I don't know. I think it could work really, really nicely nevertheless. Otherwise, the Imperial Skirmisher will advance into a Horse Archer, and then eventually into an elite unit. Here, those guys, I don't even know. They actually have 3 different ranged units, don't they? Yeah, they have 3 different ranged units. So they have Horse Archers, Crossbowmen, and Archers. These guys are going to be kind of hard to beat in a battle, in my opinion, because they have Horse Archers, which seem pretty good stat-wise. I mean, I can't see their stats right now, but I would assume that from their name, they're probably going to be pretty good. Anyway, otherwise, we have the Militae going into the Infantrymen, and then they have Infantrymen, and then they go into Legionaries. Now, these Legionaries, they're going to be, in my opinion, probably like heavy cavalry or something like that. Not heavy cavalry. They're not going to be heavy. Are they going to be heavy cavalry? No. I don't think they're going to be heavy cavalry. These guys are going to be heavy infantry or something along those lines. Do they actually say what they're actually good at? Yeah, armored cataphracts and skilled archers. So I would assume that these are the cataphracts right here, and the Legionaries are going to be kind of like their infantry sergeants or something along those lines, maybe with a sword and a shield or something like that. That seems really good. And as I said, in the Vlandian section, the Vlandians, in my opinion, are really strong. But then if you think about the Empire and what kind of flexibility this faction has in the amounts of different units they can field, it is just insanity. Because if you think about it, just think about this. They got Horse Archers, they got Crossbowmen, they got Archers, they've got heavy cavalry, and they also have infantry of some kind. Yeah, skilled archers. Yeah, look at that. Armored cataphracts. So basically the only thing that I would say can really beat these guys, what can beat these guys? I actually don't know. I suppose it really just depends on the army composition, because it really depends on whether they focus on having archers, or whether they focus on having cataphracts, or whether they focus on having infantry. You know, it depends on the vassal. But if they have all balanced armies, it's going to be very difficult to deal with these guys. So I really don't know how it's going to go, but I'm looking forward to checking them out. They seem to have pretty decent armor as well. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, that will be it for this video of Let's Talk About Bannerlord. And this was focusing on the various factions. In the next one, I will decide what we're actually going to talk about next. I don't even know what we're going to talk about. There are so many different things to talk about. And actually, you know what? If you want to hear me talk about something in particular, then let me know down in the comments, and I'll see what I can do. I thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.